This unit right here has the capability of taking energy out of the air, putting heat energy into a boiler, using a gas, a low temperature phase change gas, something that boils at a low temperature, running it into that little boiler on the bottom right there, ladies and gentlemen. So the gas is in the little bottom, the boiler in the bottom. This is a compressor. This compressor hooked up to panels out here would actually be taking the heat energy out of the air and supplying heat into the boiler. So the energy through panels, and it's not practical to put it up here together like that tonight. And so what we're going to use is we're going to use a water tank over here to supply the heat at that temperature. Now you know you can't get over that temperature of that water tank, and so we're using the right temperature here. And we're going to supply the heat into the boiler. But while we're doing this, I want you to know this right here, this compressor is going to be running even while we're taking the energy from that water tank to put it into the boiler. Anyway, as the energy from here went into the boiler, that would then get the gas excited. The gas would come up here into a controller and hit a piston. Now, this little cylinder right here is an air cylinder. As the gas hits one side, boom, it goes this way. Then the gas is sent to the other side and released from that side, and boom, it comes back. And so this unit will just be sitting here going boom, 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 boom. As long as the gas is coming out of that boiler, it'll just be operating back and forth, back and forth. As it runs back and forth, we hit a series of sprag clutches over here. When the show is over, you can come down here and see this. You can look at it. It hits the sprag clutches. As the sprag clutches are turning, then we're getting this rotation on this shaft. So as this is going back and forth, the clutches are changing that direction so that we've got constant torque applied to one direction in this shaft. This wheel right here with a pulley on it, this is connected to the shaft, and so that is going to turn the compressor. So the motion going back and forth turns the wheel that drives the compressor that gives us the heat to put it in the boiler so that the motion back and forth can drive the compressor. So in essence, the compressor is driving the thing that turns this motor or this wheel, and this wheel is driving the compressor that turns it. These two are driving one another. Now also on this line here, we've got a pump. We've got a tank of water over here. And the tank of water in here, we're taking cold water out of the bottom of the tank with this pump. So this pump is pumping water out of the tank. It's going to then circulate the water up past this little condenser up here. As it hits the condenser is going to cool it down. Remember, that unit would run and run and run as long as there was heat on the bottom and cold on the top. So the tank is going to supply the cold on the top. Now, by the way, if you were a farmer and you had water in the ground and you were going to pump the water out of the ground, that water would be coming out of the ground cold, and so that could be going into this condenser. So the pump could be pumping the water out to create the low side on here to cool the other side of this whole unit down. It's kind of interesting because as this cools it down, it recycles the liquid back into the boiler. This is heating it up. This is driving what heats it up, and that's driving the pump that's pumping the water. So this unit, ladies and gentlemen, in essence, would be able to sit here for a farmer and pump water absolutely free. No cost to the farmer at all. He could be pumping water out of the ground that's cooling it down, using the thing he's cooling down to pump the water. Let's see if we can do that here now. We all set up here? Okay, we're going to turn this unit on, and by the way, not only could we drive the pump that pumps the water, but we also got a little generator hooked up here, and we're also going to produce some electricity with the excess energy that we're getting out of this unit. So we will also be driving the compressor, and I'll create suction on a compressor to show you this compressor is running now as we're doing this. I'll load the compressor and show you it is running. Okay, we ready to go, guys? Whenever you're all ready, let me know, and we'll just go for it. Okay, here it is, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be looking here in a second to see if we're pumping water. Okay? Now you notice that this thing right here is driving this thing, which is driving this thing. And if you listen, that compressor is running. Okay, oh, we're going? You want to do the water? Okay, let's see if we're pumping water. Do you see that, ladies and gentlemen? You see us pumping water here? Okay, so now we're pumping water. That water's coming from the bottom of the barrel, going through this mechanical device, and then pumping the water back into the unit. We're pumping the water. We sit there and pump water actually all day long. You got to have the high side and the low side. Now, so if a farmer is out there and a farmer's got a pump and he's spending $100,000 a year to pump water, we can design a system for him that can sit there and pump the water for him absolutely free. Also, we could run a unit that could make electricity for hotels, because if they've got water for all of the baths and showers that everybody has to take, then the reject water that's going into the showers, the cold water, could be cooling down the low side of that unit. Let me show you that next video. So we'll show them the first video then, Charlie. And this is a unit that can also produce electricity. It did it in our shop. So this is a video from our shop. Okay. Video from our shop. The audio's out on this one, but that's all right. And if you notice, what they're doing is they're taking the unit, they're running a wheel. The wheel is turning there. From energy, we're using the same principle, concept we got right here, but we got a generator on that one. And then that generator, taking the energy from the air, can light 20 light bulbs. So we can light 20 light bulbs from the energy we take out of the air. Now that unit is kind of a Rube Goldberg looking unit, and it's kind of got this great big hydraulic piston on it. And that hydraulic piston is going back and forth and making actually a lot of noise. I don't know why we don't have the soundtrack here tonight, but, and if you look at it up close, it looks kind of like jet. I'd like to just now introduce you to Eric Brower. Come on up here, Eric. Eric has worked in our facility for the last year, or a little over a year, and was also recently inducted into the International Inventors Hall of Fame for the work that he's done. But Eric right here is going to be the man who's going to demonstrate this thing for you. And in essence, I'm just going to talk you through it while Eric is going to set up the test. Now this engine right here is a 318 cubic inch Chrysler engine. Now, by the way, on this engine right here, we have 2 cylinders on an 8-cylinder engine that have been modified. 2. Over here we can activate either one of these cylinders and we'll get the torque right up here on the front end. If I modified the engine in your car right now, and I modified it so it wouldn't run on gasoline at all, but it didn't have any power at all, you wouldn't be very happy about that. You know why? If you were sitting at a stoplight, the light was green, and you couldn't even get through the intersection before it turned red again, you'd be pretty mad at me, wouldn't you? I can modify the engines of everybody's car right now to run with no gasoline at all. All I got to do is take your keys away from you. You won't burn any gas anymore, but you won't go anywhere either. Now this engine right here has been modified, but what we're going to do for you now, we are going to test the torque on this engine. So we're going to activate this engine, test the torque on the engine, and see how much power you got in that engine. Now, by the way, over here we have got a brand new torque wrench. It has never been used before. Eric is going to take it out of the package. This is a Sears Craftsman torque wrench, the finest torque wrench that you can get. Sears Craftsman. Now, that torque wrench right out of the package, Eric is going to take a pin over here and he is going to show you something in a second when I explain to you what kind of torque we're going to get out of this engine. Now, right over here, we'll take the torque wrench, put it on here. We're going to measure the torque that we get on this engine. We're going to activate one cylinder. Now, this is a V8 engine, so on a V8 engine, you got 8 cylinders. That means you have 4 power strokes, right? You got 4 power strokes, because half the time you're coming up to compress the gas, the rest of the time you got a power stroke. So you got 4 power strokes on a V8 engine. However, if we modified this engine to the Fisher-Brauer cycle, you would have 8 cylinders, and therefore you'd have 8 power strokes, because we're not burning any gas. So you'd have 8 power strokes. Now, if I was to test one of these cylinders and determine how much torque I get on one cylinder, this is a 318 cubic inch Chrysler engine. It is the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made. This is the little one. This is the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made. If you get a specification sheet from Chrysler and you look up what kind of torque you're supposed to get out of this engine, Chrysler says that this engine, burning gasoline with all 8 cylinders going, 4 power strokes, you would get 260 foot-pounds of torque out of this engine if you were running this thing at about 1,600 RPMs. Now tonight what we're going to do is we're going to start from a dead stop. We're going to activate one of these cylinders and we're going to test the torque on it. Now let's explain to you how you can know how much torque you would get on all 8 cylinders if all of them were modified by merely testing one cylinder. If you've got one cylinder up on a V8 engine, you've got 2 cylinders up at the same time. Anytime one cylinder's up, there's another one up at the same time. So if I measure the torque on one cylinder all the way through a cycle, I would have to double that torque to account for the second cylinder that would be going through the same cycle. So if I got 100 foot-pounds of torque on this torque wrench, activating one cycle all the way through the cycle, then I would have to say there would be 200 foot-pounds of torque on the 2 cylinders that would go through that cycle together. And then there are 6 other cylinders somewhere in their travel, so to compensate for the other 6 cylinders and what would happen with those cylinders, take what you get on the 2 cylinders all the way through their cycle, divide that in half, and that's what you get on the other 6 cylinders. So what did I just say? If we test 100 foot-pounds of torque through one cylinder, we would then be showing that we could get 300 foot-pounds of torque on all 8 cylinders. All right, now, we're going to test the torque here, but before I do, I want to tell you one other thing. The biggest V8 engine Chrysler made puts out 380 foot-pounds of torque. 380 foot-pounds of torque. Now, whatever torque I get on one cylinder, if I multiply it times 3, that's what I'd get on all cylinders. So that's the key, multiply by 3. So if I take 260 foot-pounds on this engine, if I divide that by 3, how much is it? It's 85, roughly 85 foot-pounds. So therefore, if we test the torque on this engine, and Eric is going to show you where 85 foot-pounds is, if we go to 85 foot-pounds, oh, you do have it there. Okay. I didn't know they had that up there, but that's the data on the general engine specifications. If this little red needle right here, when we activate this, goes to where Eric's pin is, that's 85 foot-pounds of torque, that means that we would be getting on this engine modified to our principle the same power that Chrysler gets out of this engine running it on gasoline. So if it goes to there, we're as good as Chrysler. Now the biggest V8 engine that Chrysler made is 380 foot-pounds of torque. So therefore, if we take 380 foot-pounds of torque and divide it by 3, what do we get? About 126, 127. So Eric will show you where 126 foot-pounds of torque is on that wrench. Now, if that red needle, when we activate this, goes to where Eric's pin is on that torque wrench, then, ladies and gentlemen, we will be proving to you that we're getting the same torque out of this engine modified to the Fisher-Brauer concept as Chrysler gets out of the biggest V8 engine that they made. And this is the smallest V8 engine that they made. All right, so we're going to set up the test now, and we're going to prove to you what's going on. You guys ready? Go ahead. Go ahead, Eric's going to set up the test. Want to go on this side or that side? All right, okay. Okay, now Eric is setting up the test. Now remember, if the needle, when we hit this with the pressure from the Fisher-Brauer concept, without any gasoline, if it goes about halfway across these numbers, over to about there, we're as good as Chrysler is. If it goes to within about a half an inch of the end of this tip right here, then we are as good with the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made as they are with the biggest V8 engine that they made. Okay. All right, you ready to do it? Everybody ready? How about the camera? You guys ready to film this? Okay, let's go for it, Eric. This is my favorite part of the whole show. Go ahead and pull her down. This is my favorite part of the whole show, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what in the world is going on here? You remember that if we went about halfway through the numbers, we were as good as Chrysler was. So this was going to be about as good as Chrysler was. If we got out here about an inch away from the tip, that was going to be as good as Chrysler was in the biggest V8 engine that they made. What in the world is this out here? Now, by the way, when you get off this scale, it kind of goes askew, and you will notice it went real askew. See how askew that thing went? Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of power shown right here. Now, the reason why I was advertising for Sears Roebuck in this is because Sears Roebuck sponsored this demonstration, and the reason why I say that is they guarantee these torque wrenches for life. Oh well, I figured the least I could do is give them a commercial advertisement. Now, what we're going to do next for you is we're going to run this engine. Now, this engine is the very first engine that was ever modified. Eric modified this in about a 40-day period of time from the time that I talked to him. He had to prove two things with this engine here so that we could put money into developing the rest of it, including this one right over here. Now, this engine right here, the way it sits now, actually we're going to run that for you now. It has got two exhaust ports in it. So there's an exhaust port here, an exhaust port here. And so what's happening is we're running CO2 in this engine. We got a CO2 tank here. We're running it right into the engine. And as it comes into the engine, it's going to be exhausting out here. The reason why we did that on the road primarily was because it's user-friendly. We could use pentane, but everybody'd stink pretty bad and get a headache. And so this is user-friendly, CO2. We're going to run the engine, but if there's an exhaust here, then you're going to hear noise, right? So you'll hear some noise when the engine runs. We're going to show you that you can get the RPMs that you're looking for over here. And by the way, the pressures on those cylinders using CO2 for those technical people in the crowd is pretty much exactly what we're getting out of the finished model. And this unit right here, by the way, when we run it, you'll notice that the CO2 hitting the heads is condensing on the heads. It's coming out here in white as snow. So it'll be coming out here in a stream white as snow as it's running. Now, another thing we're going to do is I'm going to caution my associates here that they take it easy with this thing because this engine's got so much power that it wants to walk right off of that frame. And by the way, for those people who wonder how much torque there really was in that engine, we can tell you now from calculating it on the fourth engine model that we have now, and the torque on that engine would be between 1,500 and 1,600 foot-pounds. Now, by the way, how much torque is that? The largest semi-truck in the world, you can run it on 1,450 foot-pounds. So we're saying that when we modified that engine right there, that engine could drive the biggest semi-truck in the world. the smallest V8 engine Chrysler made. So there's a lot of torque there. All right, so we are going to run it for you so you can see the RPMs and you can see this run. Are we ready to do that? We got Big Mike up here to catch it if it starts falling, starts wanting to walk away from us. Go ahead and go with it. Everybody ready here? All right, go ahead. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the cost to modify the car that you're driving right now, we anticipate will be $1,500 or less. And then you will never, ever, ever stop at a gas station again with that car for the full life of that engine. You want to know what the life of the engine is? We anticipate, because of the cooler temperatures, because we aren't using high temperatures here, we're using very, very low temperatures with low temperature gases. We would anticipate that the life of that engine, because of the difference in the power stroke and the way that we're getting the energy on that unit, is giving you a steady pressure all the way through the cycle without tearing your bearings apart. And also, that engine will run a lot cooler, and so therefore will last a lot longer. We anticipate that this engine, once you rebuild it, the same engine in the car you're driving now, you'll get approximately 500,000 miles before you have to rebuild it again. 500,000 miles on one rebuild. And because you got hydrocarbons that slip past the rings, they dirty the oil. Because you don't have that anymore, because we're not burning anything in that engine anymore, you will never, ever, ever again have to change the oil in your car. Oil changes are over. No more oil changes. We'll just make time. Oh, yeah, no, I don't want that job. Okay, now, the next thing we want to show you, though, is we want to show you this engine right here. Now, this engine just came out of our R&D lab. This is one of the two models that we're finishing right now. The second model isn't quite developed. We were going to try to show you a model tonight that would run just on the energy in the air itself here. And so the ambient temperature would be sufficient to run the engine. In other words, the engine would just want to run all the time. You'd be trying to brake it whenever you stopped, and that would be it. The brakes are off and you go. This engine right here doesn't run on that same concept, but this engine, Eric is going to show you. He worked a lot to put this together. What we did was, we can't completely run the engine the way it's going to be made to modify to your car, because what happened was we found out that we had some seals over here, and the seals were popping whenever we put it in, so we had to change the valving structure on it, and we didn't have time to change it. So we are going to run this engine for you. Eric is also going to show you that you can accelerate and decelerate the engine with this little unit right over here, just like you would with the foot feet in your car. And so Eric is now going to turn this one on and run this one for you and show you the acceleration and the deceleration. And so he will run that for you now. This one isn't going to make noise. Okay, you see the engine? See, he's slowing it down. Okay, so that's the engine right there. He can slow it down, speed it up. We can't go real fast with it because we'll break the seals. So we have to solve the seal problem before we can completely change it. But you notice the engine right there? That's a 4-cylinder engine right there, running. There's no noise, without the exhaust, and he can accelerate and decelerate it. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the low temperature phase change engine is right here, right around the corner. Now we anticipate it's going to take one more rebuild. We can change these so that we don't blow the gaskets and then blow the seals, and then we will be ready to start modifying cars. So This is my brother in Jesus Christ, my friend, compadre, a man who his integrity is like God's itself. And this is a man you can trust. His name is Dr. Victor Fisher. I waited 8 years for this moment. Now, I have always believed in him. I mean, you know, I have always believed in him. And let's get this thing on. Got to put it kind of around. You hold that right there, and I'll put it on here. Hold that. All right. We got you. All right. Okay, let's see if we can hear him.
I'm not there. Yes, I'm.
All right.
Okay.
All right? Okay. Now, Dr. Victor Fisher is the man who developed the most efficient engine cycle in the world. This is the man who proved that they built the steam engine wrong. Everybody who ever studied engineering, this man took a giant step right past it. Everybody in thermodynamics, everybody in engineering in the whole world. I'm proud to introduce you to him. I'm going to let him talk for himself now.
Is it me? Can you hear me now? Is that okay?
You got to kind of put it right up there in front.
Right there. Okay.
All right, that's good.
That's good. Well, thank you very much for your kindness. And I want to also thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity to get back with Dennis and extend my research into another new era, and that is the CO2 engine, which we call the cryo engine. Cryo is means cold. All of the activity, internal combustion engines, and all the normal steam engines that we've seen in the past have all been classified as heat engines, including my engine that I utilize in the supercritical water oxidation process, which is will revolutionize the wastewater and municipal solid waste treatment activity in the future. That required a heated water system. Through your generosity and supporting Dennis, we have now embarked on a new venture, and that venture is building the cryo engine. The cryo engine is exactly the same basic information or basic theory that was applied for in our original patents for the original Fisher heat engine. In fact, we specifically realized that other fluids other than water was a viable potential. Fluids like ammonia, CO2, freon, propane, various other fluids that do vaporize at relatively low temperatures. The jumping into the CO2 era, instead of going through the ammonia cycle, which was what we were just about to do in 1988, we in fact bought the basic system for the ammonia engine, and then, as you all know, there was a change in the activity.
I had to go to the country club.
You had to go to the country club, right? And so when we finally were reconnected through God's help, I'm sure, that Dennis said, well, let's go on and see if we can do something in the cryogenic area, or to take advantage of the atmospheric heat. And after our first meeting, my wife and I returned to Evanston, Illinois, where we were living at that time. And I spent about a week or two and called Dennis up and said, I think we can do it in one jump, by utilizing carbon dioxide with the Fisher cycle. And he said, let's do it. And so I returned to New Jersey, and he has given me the support, fullest support, to build a sort of a breadboard, a machine that is a universal test platform, and that can utilize or be able to withstand the high potential forces that we might experience, and in a safe mode. The device that you saw, many of you saw last night in the back room, is the result of that activity. Nearly 60 computer drawings were generated in the past 2 months, and this, what you're seeing there, is the net result of that. Within the last week or so, we were able to proof test the validity of the design and its capability to be a good workstation. We now are in the process of closing the loop utilizing CO2, which obviously has never been done before. Many people have used CO2 in an open loop status, but never returning the discharge, the exhaust, so to speak, back into a heat exchanger and then recycling it again into the engine. Since most of my experience has been with water, though water and CO2 have a lot of very, very similar characteristics, I thought I designed this workstation, or this laboratory unit, to around those basic assumptions that I found in the heat engine with water, which has to get heated up quite high temperatures. We found yesterday, to be precise, that CO2 in this type of temperature that we're seeing, we're experiencing these last couple days, gets really heated up, like Dennis demonstrates over there. Really, really, really gets heated up to such a point that it is almost unusable. And what I mean by that is that basically the Fisher cycle, as explained in the patents, require liquid in and liquid out. What was happening was that the liquid was so hot coming out of the heat exchanger that when it was put into the room temperature warm cylinder, 100% of the liquid vaporized. And I ended up with a gas as my discharge. That is contrary to the Fisher cycle, and that means that you can never recondense it back into the liquid form. You have to have liquid to recondense it before in the exhaust area. So what we're doing this morning is we've obtained a couple hundred pounds of liquid of dry ice, and we're actually chilling the heat exchanger. Now this is really interesting because it reminds me of my first exposure with Dennis. He had a heat pump that he was selling and demonstrating, and he had a chamber, a large chamber, that was a big refrigerator, and he put his heat panels and his collectors for his heat pump in this chilled down chamber, and to demonstrate that he can still extract a large amount of heat from the cold air, what we normally think of as cold air, and transfer that into the house and have it nice and warm in the house. Here it's turning out with the cryo engine that it wants to operate in a cold environment too, like that. So this really opens up some real interesting future potentials. And that is that in Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, especially Lake Superior, you have some fairly cold water, and you could, if we can extract the heat from even those cold waters, we could actually propel a boat without any fuel, and that would have obviously a major commercial advantage. Not having to carry fuel, which would be increase our payload and also the cost of fuel. So it's still by extracting.
Let me add one thing to that. If you look at a boat, what do you have driving the boat? A diesel engine with a big cylinder. Now take that diesel engine out with the big cylinder and put a Fisher cylinder there, which is exactly what the supercritical oxidation plant is.
That's right.
Then you take the energy from the ocean and you'd be able to run that. He's saying that we're talking about being really close to that.
That's right. That's exactly right. Now, this is a whole, from a scientific point of view, it's a whole new chapter that, because all basic and advanced thermodynamics make the claim that 69 degrees is the cold sink, so-called cold sink, and that no heat engine can operate any lower temperature than 69 degrees because that's the atmospheric average temperature. And so all heat engines have to be 69 degrees or hotter. Here we're operating an engine at less than 69 degrees. And
It's impossible.
That's right. Like if you use gas law, and needless to say we're using liquid vapor law, and the phenomena we discovered with water was the initial kickoff, but what we're discovering today and tomorrow and the next week is going to be where the real revolution actually starts. We're, as I say, right at the moment, charging up the unit for the first time with dry ice as our to keep
Heat source.
As our heat source. Yes. We anticipate, though, for those that are the next step forward, we anticipate that this exercise of putting dry ice in is really a startup exercise. That once the system is up and running and is operating at a normal load, that it will have a tendency to also reduce the temperature of the heat exchanger, and then a balance will occur between the atmospheric temperature and the heat exchanger.
Correct me if I'm wrong. What would happen then is we'll use the dry ice to get it started,
Right.
and then it would equalize,
Right.
not needed.
Right.
So you run it 24 hours a day and night, 365 days and nights a year. If you don't shut it off, it just keeps going. You don't need to do it again. And without dry ice, we may find we can take blowers
Oh yeah.
and use blowers to cool it down to get the starter. And you don't have to do it again unless you want to shut it off and start it again.
Well,
Is that right?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Or
The first unit that Dr. Fisher built was a huge unit, single piston. We used the CO2, but we didn't know enough about the CO2 that it actually froze after a couple of minutes of running. And it would require so much heat to thaw the thing out that we wouldn't be ahead of the game at all. We certainly did learn an awful lot about carbon dioxide, CO2, and the kind of power that it had at room temperature, but also the low side. We had to get interested in how we could keep that from freezing.